is the awkward minute before the show starts, guys. So filter in, grab your virtual seats. We'll get started shortly. I think we can go. All right. Welcome, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, depending upon where you are. Welcome to the 45th Alfred L. Edwards Annual Conference. It's such a pleasure to have you guys here today. I can't see everybody's faces, but I know there's so many beautiful people smiling back at me. We're also joined by the lovely Angela Rye. But before we get things kicked off, I want to make sure I properly introduce her. So Angela Rye is an award-winning host, social justice advocate, lawyer, commentator, and self-described empower mentor. She embodies what it means to be a bringer of truth. Her thoughtful yet incisive commentary and real talk about social justice, politics, culture, and history spark much needed conversation about the state of America. She is the host of the weekly podcast On One with Angela Rye, and she has also been seen on several programs and outlets from The Breakfast Club to The Daily Show to HBO, and has been nominated for multiple NAACP Image Awards. She has been recognized for her honest and refreshing commentary and social justice advocacy by our nation's most prominent civil rights orgs, such as the National Urban League, NAACP, and National Action Network. She has also been featured in publications including the New York Times, Vanity Fair, Essence, the Washington Post, Glamour, Ebony, and The Undefeated. Angela Rye is a 2019 recipient of an honorary doctorate degree from the historic HBCU, Wiley College. She's the principal and CEO of Impact Strategies, a political advocacy, social impact, and racial equity firm based in Washington, D.C., where she creates strategic partnerships and coalitions with Capitol Hill, third-party organizations, and influencers to ensure societal change. She served as the executive director and general counsel to the Congressional Black Caucus for the 112th Congress. She also served as a senior policy advisor and counsel for the House Committee on Homeland Security for 4 years. With more than 15 years of political strategy and social responsibility experience, Angela has worked with every branch of government on a municipal, state, and federal levels. In short, she has done it all and is the epitome of Black girl magic. Angela, it's such an extreme pleasure to have you here with us this evening.
It is such a joy, Kalane. Thank you so much for having me and for reading that bio. It's always like when you're listening to your bio, but thank you.
I have to hear how great you are.
That's one way of looking at it.
So Angela, tell us a bit more about yourself. I know you experienced social activism from a very early age, watching your father, but I'm curious to know, was there a defining moment that kind of set you on a path to become the political force you are today?
I think probably birth. My dad was very intentional about naming me after Angela Davis. And so, who I know was a speaker for you all last year. And I just got to do a podcast with her and just met her for the first time a couple years ago. So you talking about fangirling, we were talking about fangirling earlier. Like, I was like, I was named after you. So for me, I think it was an intention, right, that my parents had, that I would not only be the fulfillment of their own legacy, but that I would be someone who would always put the culture, if not first, it'd be like a 1B. You know, if you take care of yourself first, then it would be a 1B. And that's something that I'm grateful. Like they're intentional about the way that they engage the community on behalf of the community, for and with the community. And I think they definitely passed that down. So I don't think there was ever like a defining or a deciding moment for me. I think that was kind of preordained, if you will.
Nice. And so Angela, what informed your choice to pursue entrepreneurship with impact strategies? I know you occupied a lot of very high impact spaces. So I'm wondering, was there a certain tension you were trying to resolve with your business?
That's a great question. What happened was when I was on Capitol Hill, I thought I was ready to leave after I was working on the Homeland Security Committee, and I was starting to kind of think about it, like maybe I should go and make some money. You don't make a whole lot of money on Capitol Hill. I was like, I got these student loans. I know the MBA program knows a little something about those student loans. So I was like, well, let me go try to figure out how I'm going to resolve that. And then Congressman Cleaver, who was going to be the incoming CBC chair, approached me about being the executive director. And I was like, no, I'm ready to leave the Hill. I'm going to go make some money. And then I couldn't shake the idea of being the ED. And so I was like, well, let me just give him some ideas, some things they can pursue while he's the chair. And I'll tell him to pass on whoever their ED will be. And I sat down and ended up writing like a 25-page strategic plan. I was like, clearly, this is what I'm supposed to do next. So I'm gonna hold the money. And when I was getting ready to leave the CBC, for sure, like, okay, it's really time to leave the Hill, I was approached by a headhunter about going to start a government affairs practice with my mentor, Singleton McAllister, who is an incredible Black attorney in the DC area. And I ended up having like 4 interviews with this firm, and they came back to me with this number where I was like, when I leave the Hill, I need to double or triple my salary. I'm not about to be making, it was like $25,000 or $45,000 more than where I was. And I was like, I'm not doing that. And I, in my mind, I was like, I really think that going inside a law firm sounds boring. I really think that a government affairs practice sounds really boring. I should do a firm my way. And we've spent all this time in the nonprofit space, really standing up and developing this brand impact for young professionals of color. And I was like, I should borrow that brand for something that's for profit. And we'd already stood up impact strategies like 2 years prior, but hadn't done anything with it. And I was like, this is the time. So I already have that brand. I've been known for doing some strong work with the CBC. I'll just do that way. And I was like, and I promise these people that I'm going to make more money than what they offered me. And there were people I sat down with, and they were like, oh, it's probably going to take you like 3 months to get your first client. I had my first client in 3 weeks. And by the time I got to the 3-month mark, I had a guarantee and retainers that was almost triple my Capitol Hill salary. So it was like, sometimes you just got to bet on yourself. And I wanted to not just prove to myself, but to other young people of color, like we can go and do this, and we can do it just as great as the white boys do. To Reginald F. Lewis's book, Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? Right. So that is that's that on that.
That's a word to everybody in the audience, whether or not you're interested in pursuing entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Let Angela Rye be the go button for you.
And even to your point, like that isn't a word that is just about starting your own business or hanging up your own shingle or whatever it is. It's like, you always have to bet on yourself. You always have to know you're worthy, because the world spends its existence telling you that you're not, in so many ways, whether it's how you appear or how tall you are, how short you are, whether or not you have all your limbs, whatever it is, they always, there's a, whether it's intentional or not, there is a constant drumbeat of why you're not adequate. And you are all the way enough. And I think that that's the point, whether you're starting a business or not, to your point.
Yeah, lovely. So Angela, as you know, our themes conference is The Uprising,
Yes.
Reclaiming the Black Voice in Business and Society. And I want to hear from you, and I'm intentionally broad with this question. What do you think business's role is in the uprising of Black people? I've heard you talk at length about a Black agenda of sorts, and I'm curious to know, how does business either fit within that agenda, or how can they support it?
Ooh, man, I'll tell you right now, this is such a loaded question. And the reason why is because, there's this reckoning that, in so many ways, we felt like, of course, the dog starts barking right now. Maybe he's experiencing his own reckoning. But, over the course of the summer, we all of a sudden had people who were like, oh my God, racism. Black lives do matter. And we're like, yes, we've been trying to tell you this, and there was this moment after, so COVID cases, of course, are disproportionately impacting people of color. There's George Floyd, there's Breonna Taylor, there's Ahmaud Arbery. I remember getting on this client call, Kalane, where it was like the Monday after George Floyd happened. And
Mhm.
we're on the call and they're like business as usual, like nothing. And so they call on me because we normally do these round of consultant updates. They call on me and they say, do you have anything? So I was like, we just gonna pretend like there wasn't this huge thing that just happened this week. Are we just gonna, because our firm is the only Black firm. I'm the only woman owned firm, and I'm still the youngest firm, even at 42. So that should tell you a little something. And I was like, I can't believe that we're gonna just brush over this. And people are like, what do you want to do? You know, the client CEO made a statement. I was like, where? They were like, oh, it's on his Instagram. I was like, he has 300 followers on his Instagram. Nobody's looking at his Instagram. What is the company gonna do? So they're like, well, let's offline, which means they didn't want to entertain my spiral in front of everyone. But for me, I'm like, I'm breathing rare air, and I'll be damned if I sit here and act like I'm not here for a purpose beyond collecting a retainer. I'm here to ensure that my folks feel like brands are responding to the crisis that is what Black America has faced for 400 plus years in this country. So we ended up in deep discussion. They ended up making a substantial financial commitment. We're actually still kind of helping them oversee and dole out the resources right now. But what I, learned in that moment is there's never a time where we have the luxury of being quiet. The responsibility, unfortunately, as frustrating as it is, as much as we already have to carry as Black folks in society, is always on us. To prick your conscience, to remind you of the responsibility you have to the consumer who's constantly overspending and never considered. And whether you put Black Lives Matter in your signature or on your court or on your t-shirt, or it comes out of your mouth, or you put up a yard sign, if Black lives don't matter in the way that you're doling out resources and not so equitably, we still have a problem. So I think the role of business is to listen to its Black employees, to its Black consultants, to hire Black executives so that we're not talking to walls, to ensure that when people call something to your attention, that you figure out not just where implicit bias exists or supremacist tendencies exist, but like, how do you dismantle structural and institutional racism in your ways of thinking? And we went department by department, product by product. Like, you really have to do that work. And it's not fair to pile that up on someone else who has a completely different job description. It's not Sis's responsibility who's overall programming, right? Just because she's Black doesn't mean she should be over an equity agenda or a diversity and inclusion agenda. That's
Mhm.
not her job. And so also hiring somebody to do that work and then really empowering them. Do not tokenize them. So that's a whole book, but that's a little bit of what I think the responsibility is.
That's really interesting. And Angela, when I think about this summer, right, and we think about the way in which there was responses to protest and such, and then you think about January 6th, I'm curious
Mhm.
to know, when you engage with these same clientele, how did their energy shift, right? Was there any sort of like light given to that? Did they touch on it at all, or did they just kind of like brush it under the rug and keep it going?
Yeah, interestingly, all of a sudden, us talking about kind of neo-Nazism and white terrorists and Donald Trumpism and what it means and how it's been masquerading for a long time, and people blowing up racism doesn't exist anymore. You have Barack Obama, like all of that, unpacking. I think that it was kind of an egg in the face kind of moment, like, oh, actually, when you give cover and you provide safe spaces for racists, they will turn on you, right? If your politics aren't aligned. And shamefully, what I think was also kind of brought to bear is the fact that it is a bipartisan, in fact, a nonpartisan problem. And if you don't treat it like it's serious, if you don't nip it at the bud right when it shows up, it will come directly to your doorstep, Nancy Pelosi, right? It'll come right to your doorstep, congressional leadership. It'll come, you know what I mean? Because the attack could have hit people on both sides of the aisle, particularly if they weren't a part of that QAnon caucus, if you will, like not affiliated with them in some way. They were talking about hanging Mike Pence. So if you play footsie with terrorists, folks who engage in xenophobic rhetoric and homophobic rhetoric and racist rhetoric, they will eventually turn on you because there's nobody confronting it. And so I hope that if nothing else, we've now learned, even this woman, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they stripped of her committee assignments yesterday in Congress. This chick is like crazy. Like now they're like, oh, we're gonna call her out on anti-Semitic rhetoric. You were dragging people who said a lot less, and not saying much about Marjorie Taylor Greene. And so I think that and it's not to be like, oh, well, this type of anti-Semitism is fine, but this isn't. I'm just saying you need to keep that same energy. When it's sexism, white women, you need to keep that same energy confronting racism. Put on your ally t-shirt and pony up, sis, right? Like all of that. And so I think that we really have to be aware that hate is just hate. And if you don't confront hate, even if you're like, I kind of don't like them people anyway, not cool. You have to confront it because at some point it's going to arrive at your doorstep and put his feet up on your desk. Because that happened.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are realizing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like, Angela, with the Biden administration, a lot of us, especially the Black community, we feel like, okay, it might not be all the way fixed, right? But we're headed towards some sort of new world order or some better direction. Angela, I'm curious to hear from you. What are you most excited about with this new administration? I know you've talked with VP Kamala Harris and all sorts of people. So just wondering what brings you joy about this new team.
Yeah, I'm not joyful yet. I am excited for Kamala, really. That's the piece about this administration that gives me the greatest joy. I have a lot of friends who are now going into the White House and working with her, working with President Biden. And I'm excited about the possibility. But what I'm most excited about is not what happens at 1600 Pennsylvania. What I'm the most excited about is how Black people and people who are aligned with Black interests come together to really move an agenda. This is the 50th anniversary of the Congressional Black Caucus's founding. It is also the 50th anniversary of the 1971 National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana. And so I would ask us to consider what it means to create, develop, and execute around an agenda that really moves the needle for us. It's been a long time for us talking and a long time for us to focus on where we're different rather than where we're aligned. And so I think it's a really good opportunity for us to come together for what really, really matters, and I think that's another thing that being in Zoom hell has caused for us, which is like, okay, what really matters at its most fundamental level? Where can I really unite with my people on the most fundamental level so that we can move the needle and ensure progress for the whole of Black America and not just part of it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, it's time to, I think it's also important that we don't look to this new administration as like the panacea or the cure-all for all our problems. But I do think it's interesting, I think, to the extent in which I feel the Black community is trying to push for new legislation and push for things to be done. And I really loved in your last podcast with Dr. Angela Davis, she spoke a lot about, and also Alicia Garza, she spoke about, the sanitization of Martin Luther King's movement, words, and us becoming a bit too moderate. What do you make of this balance, right? Because yes, you want to be charged, you want to be somewhat radical in a sense, right? But you also want to be pragmatic. How do you strike that balance?
Ooh, I think Alicia has done it well with Black Futures Lab. Alicia, for those of you who don't know, is the co-creator of Black Lives Matter. She stood up an organization called Black Futures Lab, and they talked to 30,000 Black people all over the country, the largest survey of Black people in over 150 years, to talk about what should be on an agenda for us. And surprise, Black people are kind of moderate. So she was like, this is more moderate than where I am, but I want to support what Black folks say they need, which I think is a testament to her being a true leader. But what she's gotten right really is I'm not going to evade progress altogether if whatever folks come up with isn't exactly where I need to be, which is exactly what the legislative process really is. It is about, okay, I'm gonna put my dream out here in the form of a bill, and then we're gonna talk about it, in committee, whatever committees have jurisdiction over what you're legislating. We're gonna go through it. And if I don't like some of this, I'm gonna have a change. That change is called an amendment. We're gonna vote on that amendment. It's an up or down vote, whoever wins, and then we vote it out of committee. And then it goes to the House floor, and people can do that same process in the House floor. The idea is that it would be refined by people with good intentions who represent varying perspectives and have varying experiences, and they can have their say on a bill. And at the end of the matter, it would go to the upper chamber or the lower chamber, depending on who started the bill. Or who considered the bill first, and then it goes to the president. And it's not going to be what you put forth 9 times out of 10, unless it's something that's super egregious, or there's, a whole bunch of agreement around a particular issue. And normally it's, a bill that's like 2 pages. But when you're talking about something like policing in this country, law enforcement, police violence, it's such a hot topic, and there's so much disagreement because our experiences are so divergent. There are a group of people who see law enforcement as those who protect and serve. They call them, they show up, they are right there. If they get pulled over, they can cuss them out and drag them and call them everything but a child of God. There's another group of people in this country who think the police are, because of lived experience, they're to shoot to kill. And they're not calling the police. That's the last group of people they're calling, because they're not sure if they're going to die or the neighbor's going to die if they call them. And so the reality of it is, when you're trying to legislate on something like that, it's going to be really challenging to get on the same page. And so progress may look a little more incremental. I hate incremental progress. I'm impatient, but I'm definitely not going to overthrow that at the sacrifice of one more life. If it's going to protect one more life, I'm game to move it. And that's why I think even the conversations around justice and policing, which of course was Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and the CBC's bill in the House. It passed the House. It did not pass the Senate. It wasn't even considered on the Senate floor. But that's why I hope that Joe Biden would be amenable to that bill, even if it does end qualified immunity. He talks about reining in qualified immunity, but that hasn't saved lives. And so it's like, at this point, if we know we need to save some lives to keep folks alive in community, maybe we do need to end qualified immunity. And I hope he will adjust to being open to that, since that was Kamala's bill.
Yeah. Angela, I think it's interesting when you think about this balance of like radicalism, but also pragmatism, especially in the corporate sector. And I love the anecdote you shared earlier about when you had the meeting with your client. But how would you advise us as business professionals, right? We're going into these billion-dollar entities that might not necessarily be prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion in a way that we would want. How do we make sure that we don't lose our seat at the table while trying to bring things to it?
I would tell you, there's someone who's a mentor to me named Paula Madison, who has been, if you guys should really Google Paula, a giant in the media industry, giant. And Paula has always been unapologetically Black, refused to compromise on that. And I think that somewhere in our psyche, we're taught that we need to go in and be invisible, fly below the radar, don't, ruffle too many feathers so that you can keep advancing. And then all of a sudden, when you get to the top, you can become like Denmark Vesey, right? Like, that's not how that works. All of a sudden, you're going to be rifle carrying like Harriet, like all of a sudden, you're going to be like Huey Newton and Angela Davis. It's not really how it works. It's like however you show up is where you are probably going to end up. And that doesn't mean that you need to wear a beret and a leather jacket every day on the outside, but it does mean that if you compromise your values, your core beliefs when you first walk in the door, it's going to be hard for people to trust you later. I think it's so important that we always realize that there is a double consciousness, a duality that we have to carry into every workspace, every school space, etc. We have an obligation when we walk through a door and sit at a table to ensure that our role meant that the door is now open for other people who look like us, that our role at that table meant that we need to make sure that the table is expanded and there are more seats because we're there. There is a thing I talk about often, which is the legacy of the first versus the legacy of the one and only. You're not doing anything if your legacy was about being the first and the last. That's, if you blaze a trail, you bust through that door and you close that door behind you, you failed. But it really should be about the legacy of the first, where you go in and hopefully you're not the first in 2021, right? Like that really shouldn't be the goal. But if you do have to go and blaze a trail, you're knowing that you're there to carry the culture on your back. And yeah, it's a lot of pressure, but that's what it looks like when you're trying to dismantle, white privilege and racism, that has been institutionalized and is systemic in so many ways, from corporate to government. You're going to be opening doors and blazing trails. And if it's just so that you could get your feature, you're not leaving a real lasting legacy. And I would argue that that's failure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when you're saying, you're speaking a bit about the foundation of things. I remember in a talk you gave at Winston-Salem, you quoted, we have to destroy the mess of foundation before we can even stand on common ground. What exactly were you alluding to?
That's a bar. That's good. I don't remember saying that.
Because in my mind, I like extrapolated that out a bit, and I'm thinking maybe capitalism is that foundation, right? Just given its anti-Black roots. What were you probably mentioning then? And if it is capitalism, right, how do we go about quote unquote dismantling or destroying it?
Well, really what I'm thinking about is it's so funny because if we look at the roots of capitalism in this country, it's really not funny at all, but it's interesting. Um, if capitalism is that Black people work for free or for less, that's not a system any of us should be striving to maintain or be a part of. Same thing when we talk about policing in this country. If we know that policing started at its foundation with returning fugitive enslaved people, it's not a system we should be fighting to protect. So it's like, what is the thing where we can go and be successful, empower ourselves, empower our family, empower our families, empower our communities, that doesn't mean that if I work 15 times as hard as you still get half my check. I understand that's what many people think socialism is, but capitalism hasn't really served us either. It's been rather abusive to us, right? If we're honest, if we look at wage disparities and the wealth gap in this country, with Black people, it hasn't served us. So why are we fighting so hard to protect something that hasn't served us? And then the question becomes, well, now that we've acknowledged it doesn't serve us, what does? And that's where I think part of the uprooting can begin, just being comfortable with being able to ask the question, what kind of system really will serve us? Is it one where healthcare is affordable or free? Is it one where, student debt could be erased if we, work in public service, if we make below a certain number, certain income, if we come from, have ancestors who were enslaved? My dad talks often about the need for a federal government designation for descendants of the United States enslaved. And he has likened it to what they did with Alaskan natives, but they've only done that particular designation for federal government contracts. But what would it mean to expand that? So would it, we get a tax credit or a benefit? Would it mean that we would be excused from paying taxes for a decade? What is the thing that would make capitalism, or at least systemic government, serve us better? And I think it's just opening ourselves up to possibilities, that normally we're like, we can't do that. We can never do that. They do it all the time. They just got a tax break in this last COVID package, even though families are still suffering, and but we are conditioned to believe we're not worthy of that. So we won't even consider it. I don't have the answer. I just have more questions.
Well, Angela, I think it's a perfect tee up to this sort of like utopian world. And so if you had the unchecked power, like you had to go to pen and you could put a piece of legislation into action, what would it be?
So I would definitely ensure that we had reparations, and it would be across the board. Congresswoman Waters really pushed for these offices of minority and women inclusion in, I think it was the Dodd-Frank bill, and they only applied to financial services agencies. I would make those federal government wide. I would ask state legislatures to emulate that across the board in the states, and also ask for cities with a percentage of 25% or higher demographics of Black folks to do the same. I think that reparative incentives would include government programs, housing credits, access to capital, that venture funds could not be stood up if they didn't, ensure a certain number of dollars were provided to Black owned businesses. I have a whole list of stuff I would do. But it would be some type of a Black, like an overall Black empowerment legislative piece. That would go across, government, make certain requirements and regulate businesses in certain ways to ensure that we really are holistically taking care of our buying power in this country now is $1.3 trillion. So I would be ensuring that it's not just buying power that we're protecting, it's wealth, and
Yeah.
closing the wealth gap.
Yeah.
So it's a part of it.
Yeah. So this summer, there's been a lot of statements that were very evocative. There's a lot of, hashtags, a lot of phrases that were thrown around, and defund the police was a major one, right? It even elicited commentary from my forever president, Barack Obama. And I'm curious to know, like, how can we explain, or how can we present it in a way that doesn't, get people to eschew it so quickly, right? Like, how do we state that, yes, these things need to change, and not have people be so like negatively, or make it feel so radical in a way?
You know what I would do? I would get every police officer and former veteran who was a part of the Capitol Hill terrorist attack, and I would take their pictures and I would say, these are police officers. Don't you want to defund them? And then I would say, what if there are others who are not identified? And then I would say, this is about shifting resources and reallocating them to things that we know will empower communities who have been treated invisible and like they don't matter for centuries. And if you can't agree with that after seeing this, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
But I think we have to get out of the habit of like, oh, we have to say it differently. They just can't digest it. Imagine how it feels to not know if you're going to live or die. I can't digest that. And so it's funny because normally, like, I feel like this is a point of hypocrisy for me, because we talked earlier about, if you just can get a part of it, like, why can't you take the part of it? But this part to me feels like there's some things you just can't revise, you can't edit, you can't change, you can't make better. Because if we could, then Barack Obama's 2014 commission on what was it? Commission on Policing, basically. That's not the right title. I normally know this title, but the 21st Century Council on Policing, I think is what it was. Then that would have worked. That didn't work. So my thing is, you cannot revise and make a system better that was built on the abuse of Black people. You can't fix it. It has to be changed.
Yeah.
Community safety has to look a lot different. So people say reimagine policing, reimagine it, defund it, shift it, reallocate it, whatever you have to do. But this is not working for us. We're literally dying, right? So it's like, yeah, I don't want to make you comfortable with my words, because I'm uncomfortable dying.
Yeah, touche. And Angela, just to click on what you said earlier about like reimagining, reshifting, what would community safety, if you were to design it on your own, what would it look like?
Ooh, I think about all the time. I'm from Seattle. There's an officer that everybody loved. I think the guys loved her because she was so pretty, and when we were in high school. But there's an officer, Officer Candy. Everybody loved Officer Candy. And when we were real young, we had Officer Friendly. I don't know if that was nationwide, Officer Friendly. But it was, this idea that the people are just ever present, and even if they don't wear a badge, there are people who are always looking out for you, in your neighborhood. They're looking out, they're making sure they're good. The grandmas who are over the neighborhood watching, like, I saw so-and-so. It's engaging the whole community around what it looks like to keep us safe. Somebody who's like, can you check to make sure I locked my door, and then really digging into, what do people need to feel safe in their neighborhoods? What do they need to feel safe at school? Do they feel safe because there's an officer with a gun and they have to walk through a metal detector? Probably not. It probably creates more anxiety. So what do people need to feel more secure? Is it more reliable income? Is it, a Ring doorbell? You know what I mean? Like, really asking all those questions. And I think sometimes, again, we just make a lot of assumptions based on our own experiences without listening to people that have a different set of experiences. And then we don't get very far. I think we just got to do some fact finding for a little while.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. So I want to ask you maybe two more questions before we open the floor to the live Q&A. Angela, this year, or this past year, excuse me, has been a crazy one, right? Like we saw the disproportionate effects of COVID, inequity in healthcare, education, et cetera, on display. And it's nothing new to us Black people, but for some reason, 2020 felt just more heightened, right? It felt like it was completely inescapable. How did you manage, especially you being in the weaves of it a day in and day out, how did you manage to kind of stay sane and above the water?
I would argue there were some days where I didn't feel so sane. There were some days, I think, especially in the beginning, where I was like, what is this Groundhog's Day? Like you're literally waking up and it's the same thing. And then, well, probably at this around the same time, when we started it, I treated it like we would like a snowstorm in DC or like in Seattle growing up. And in Seattle growing up with my dad and my mom, it became like this thing where you like cook a bunch of food and it's like comfort food. So comfort food was like my thing, and all trying all these new desserts and making all this stuff. Because I was like, I just need to be comforted. Like I think subconsciously, like I need to be soothed. And then about 15 pounds later, I was like, this cannot be the move. So now I need to do a detox. So it was kind of finding that rhythm. And then on the content side, I was like, well, if we're all about to die, like let me let me talk to some people that I've always wanted to interview. And like I did a cooking masterclass with Patti LaBelle and a freestyle masterclass with Method Man, and did a conversation on race and acting with Will Smith, and just like so many different people who I admire and really like to learn from and hear from. And it was incredible. So there were a bunch of content things that we tried out just to see how they worked. And then there was a lot of reflection time. How can I get better? You know, what should I be doing differently? You know, reading, trying to figure out how to be the best possible me, which I know is a luxury and a privilege, because there are a lot of folks who look like us who are essential workers and they didn't get a break. They got more work.
Yeah.
You know, so thanking God every day that that was my story, and that it wasn't one where I was risking my life every single day. Like the biggest risk I take is going to the grocery store. And you know, really in gratitude around the fact that my income wasn't hit, you know, in a significant way. Because at first I was like, okay, if I can't go do speeches, if I'm not doing on-air commentary, like what's going to happen? And it ended up being a really good year. And now we're doing virtual conferences like this, University of Michigan. So I would much rather be with you all in person, by the way. It's just better vibes. I can see if y'all are falling asleep on me right now or something.
They're live attention. And Angela, you'll have to send me your the detox you find, because I too have gained a little.
Oh, Queen Afua. Get order. Where's I wish I could grab it. It's right down there too. Queen Afua, Sacred Woman. She has like a whole thing. She'll have you vegan though. I told her I was gonna eat. I was like, I'm gonna be veganish. I'm gonna eat seafood still once a week. Now I'm eating seafood a little more than once a week right now, but it's been good. Somebody said, no way we are falling asleep. Hey, I didn't know. I can't hear anybody.
We're doing this really soon. I just wanted to ask one last question, Angela, before we turn it over to the audience.
Yeah.
So, you know, I definitely think there are times when you need to rest. You need to decompress. You need to ensure that you're whole and well. But what I'm most worried about is that we might be shifting toward the place of complacency. And I liked how Dr. Angela Davis talked about it on your podcast about this time being really important, because it's a little of a lull, right, where you can kind of organize together. So how would you advise us to maximize this time, right, and not get too comfortable where we are?
That's the thing, right? I think it goes back to Alicia's organization, Black Futures Lab, and all the effort. And Black to the Future is the side that did the agenda. All the effort they put in talking to our folks, like building on that to really create our agenda. There are a lot of people breathing a sigh of relief, but you can't rely on an administration to be your advocate. You got to advocate for yourself. And even if they are more friendly and the pressure doesn't have to be as intense and there doesn't have to be stage protests and marches or whatever, it doesn't mean that they're going to get your interests all the way right. They can't do that without hearing from you often. Trust the environmentalists are, the gun control advocates are, Folks in financial services are communicating their interests every single day to regulators. We got to do that same thing. There are folks, charter school advocates are going to be in Department of Education. Rest assured, the pharmaceutical companies are in there pleading their case right now about why they should be the ones to get funding for the next vaccine or whatever the COVID treatments are. Like, please believe everyone else gets a pass to do what they need to do to ensure their resources are tight, their needs are met, and their policy prescriptions are met. We're the only ones that don't do that. And every other empowered group in every society all over the world advocates for their interests. And we got to organize around an agenda that we can all agree on.
Yeah.
Or most of us can agree on.
Absolutely. Okay. Now is the time for all of our lovely guests to go ahead and ask their questions to Angela Rye directly. So what we'll do is you'll leverage the raise hand feature. It should be on the bottom of your Zoom panel. Raise your hand. I will unmute you. You will have the floor. Unfortunately, we can't see your face, but I imagine it's pretty. You'll have the floor. You'll ask your question. And then once that's done, I'll put you back on mute. So let me go ahead and kick this off. Okay. All right, here we go. Brian Johnson, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. This is where my Zoom deficiency is starting to show.
In church, they say, take your time, baby.
All right, there you go.
It's Brian's birthday. Happy birthday, Brian.
It is Brian's birthday. Brian is also one of the directors here at the University of Michigan. A lovely man, part of the reason why I'm here. So very happy he's our first.
That's great.
Well, thank you, Kalane. Thank you, Angela. I did want to say I met your buddy Drazy in a Uber, and he changed my life. So tell him that Brian from Michigan said hello.
Oh wow, I sure will.
But secondly, so I love this piece where you talked about you can't rely on an administration to advocate for you. And I want to hear your thoughts about how we move forward, given during the last election, we saw a lot of people that came out, saying that, what has the Democratic Party done for us? What, we shouldn't vote, et cetera, including your boy Charlemagne. So I just want to know, like, what are your thoughts about how we can reach out to folks, or how we get people to mobilize or even engage them more, so that they, I feel like we dodged a bullet, and they scare me a lot. What do you have to say about how we move forward now that we have Biden to get these folks engaged in the process?
Well, the first thing I say is I would be careful about misquoting somebody that I say is my brother. Leonard definitely never said that we shouldn't vote. He's never said that. He did an interview with Joe Biden where Joe Biden said at the end of the interview, if you vote for Trump, you ain't Black, unprompted. And I think that resulted in a number of people questioning, like, okay, well, what's the Democratic Party really done? I think it's a fair question, right? When you look at the almost blind loyalty that we as a people have had to the party and what we've received as an ROI, come on, business people, the return on investment has lagged significantly. And I do think that it's time for us to ask those questions. But because we have a clear understanding now that they don't know what to do, that they don't know how to treat us, that they don't know how to meet our needs, we have to come up with a clear set of demands and an agenda that makes sense. One of my friends, Wes Bellamy, developed something called Our Black Party that is not designed to compete with a political party, but it is designed to be a place where we can talk about our agenda, talk about what our needs are. He's adopted all of Alicia Garza's Black to the Future agenda. And it's a place where we can have, a safe space and a conversation. But I think that the conversation around, holding votes hostage and what that means, I think that we put a lot of fear behind what folks are really saying. I think that they were saying, for example, when Puff said that they court everyone else but us. That's the truth. They court the business community. There's no expectation that the business community will automatically vote Republican or Democrat. There just isn't. There's no expectation that the Jewish community will automatically vote Democrat or Republican. They court them. They actively court blue collar white workers, even though blue collar white workers haven't been with them since the late 1960s, right? They don't court us. They come to us 2 weeks before the election and be like, well, here's some church fans. Y'all know what to do, right? They don't even give us contracts when we know how to reach us better than anybody else. So I think the conversation should be, here's what you owe us. I wrote an op-ed with 6 of my good girlfriends in media, and we got dragged by the party for that. Because we were like, you owe us, Joe Biden. Here are the 3 things you must do. And now on the back end of him doing all 3 things, people are like, y'all was right. That was good. We were getting dragged for months. Like, y'all gonna cost us the election. No, we're trying to show you your worth. Going back to the idea of worthiness, our how can I say this differently? We have to value ourselves and show people how to treat us. That's just the truth. And it may be uncomfortable for a little while because they're like, ooh, that's different. But ladies, you've been in some relationships before, but you like, that's it. Like that is it. We're not doing this that way anymore. You're like, you gonna respect me. You gonna put some respect on my name. And that's what this is. I don't think anybody's well, maybe Ice Cube was, but other than Ice Cube, I don't think he was trying to get folks to stay home. And, we were really intentional. We had a lot of conversations, arguments about wording, about phrasing. And I think at the heart of it, there was a lot of fear from us. What happens if this backfires? What happens if they tell us it doesn't matter? What happens if they tell us they're not going to court us? How are we going to feel? What are we going to do? Are we going to not vote? Of course not. Right? Like, of course not. But you have to make the demand. Do you think we would have had Kamala if we didn't make the demand? That's not where they were going. They were going to get y'all's governor, in case you didn't hear. So just know, sometimes it's all right to stage a little protest. They had us confused about Gretchen. We don't want her kidnapped, but we did not want her in the White House. At least I didn't. Maybe y'all did. I didn't.
Thank you, Brian.
Happy birthday, Brian, but don't be lying on my brother now.
I can imagine Brian quietly scurrying back to the audience, but thank you.
He ain't quietly scurrying. He's right here in these comments. He still fighting me in the comments. I'm not listening to Brian. That's a fact check, Brian. That is incorrect. Pull the clip, run the tape.
We're going to move on to our next person, Toby.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us, Angela. And I know that I was there. I can't remember if I was an alumni or still a student. I think I was still a student when you came to speak at another ALE conference. So unfortunate that we can't be together, but thank you still for so much for making the time. I'm currently in corporate America and tech on the West Coast, and would love to, I think you touched on this a little bit, but would love to get your take on the balance between doing the work and doing your job. I'm about 9 months into a new role, new industry and focus in tech. And so I would love to get your take on, especially as an entrepreneur and getting contracts, doing the job, but still bringing your full and authentic self and holding people to task when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and not just slapping labels, but actually doing the work. How do you balance that?
Man, that's so hard. I'll tell you that my privilege is I lived around people and was groomed in a family where that was never a choice. And I think that's a privilege, and quite frankly, an honor. I don't know what it's like to feel like I have to balance at all. Like, it's like, it's inherent in, kind of who I am and how I was raised, like calling out injustices when I see them, speaking up if something's not right, really addressing challenges when I see them, because I don't want to be uncomfortable for your comfort. If that means that it's not a good fit and you wanted somebody that was more docile and cool and will let you kind of just slide below the radar, I'm not your girl, you know? And so I think that if there was a needle to thread, it is deciding very early that the check doesn't matter more than your dignity, you know, that your worth is not tied up in whatever the direct deposit is. It's not. And if that becomes a part of the equation, you're going to stay compromising in ways that will cause you to lose a significant amount of sleep at night.
Mhm. Yeah, very well said, Angela. I'm gonna jump over to Titus Potter. Or Daryl Ward is also fine too.
All right. Um,
Yeah, oh, okay.
hello,
Let's
Angela.
go, then
Thank
we'll
you
do
so much
Titus.
for
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, now it's
Yeah,
Titus.
is it? Oh, it's back to me. Well, I
Nice.
first want to start by saying congratulations. I always love hearing from Black women attorneys. I'm an attorney myself. I went to the University of Illinois College of Law. My question goes back to the holding accountability to the Democratic Party. So you mentioned earlier that if we look at the rap sheet, there hasn't been much done for Black people and how they come to us at the end. Um, Step by step, how would you approach the changing of that? Because even though we play a role in the party, it doesn't seem as if our role and the value placed upon us has increased. So while we've had a Black president, we have currently a Black female vice president, which is amazing, and I'm so proud to have. I don't feel like the party is valuing us more for our contributions, and that in part, some of these appointments that have been made are just an acknowledgement, but not really addressing some of the issues that have been plaguing our community for the last century. And if these issues aren't addressed, what steps do we have? Because we clearly can't vote Republican with this continuous neo-Nazi movement growing under their umbrella. So what would you recommend?
Well, I think the first thing is I want to shout out my brother, who is the new Democratic Party chair, Jamie Harrison, who ran a really great race in South Carolina for the United States Senate, but South Carolina just wasn't quite ready for a Black man, a brilliant Black man from Yale Law School. But Jamie is going to be incredible. He doesn't play. He doesn't play about our value. And I think that he will be in a position to really shake up some of that ingrained institutional leadership. Is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. And I think that while he's doing that, we should be, again, in the 50th anniversary of the Gary National Black Political Convention. What are our agenda items, right? We should be pushing an agenda and not worried about the party apparatus. We should be understand that our allegiance is to ourselves and to our advancement and not to a party. That's it. It is a vehicle. It is not the only way for us to move an agenda. And I think that's the most important thing. One thing I love about young folks right now is young people refuse to be put in a box. So it's like, whatever is going to serve me, whatever works for me, I'm rolling with that. You know, so maybe 9 times out of 10, I'm super progressive. Maybe on this 10th issue, I'm a little more business friendly, whatever it is, but I'm going to be responsible for voting my interests. One of the monikers from one of the CBC founders, also, of course, the 50th anniversary, was no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. And if I could implore Black people to do anything in 2021 in Black History Month, it would be to always move the needle on your interests. You don't owe your allegiance to anybody except for to our community and to our culture, period. And so if the party is going to work to make sure this happens, great. If they're not, so what? There are Black people who happen to be Democrat who will move the needle on these issues. And that's what I think we should be focused on. What do we need right now?
Mhm.
You know, I'm not worried about how to help the party survive. That might be somebody else's job. That is not I do not care about these party titles. All I care about is Black advancement. I'm not romanticizing the Republican Party either. My dad's mentor was Arthur Fletcher, who's the father of affirmative action. He was a Republican, but he got over the Republican Party too. He's like, they don't get it, forget it. And that's the thing, like, no matter what, white people going white. Hate to say it that way, but it's true. We need to be focused on how to move our agenda. They get real convenient amnesia sometimes, even some of the best allies. So we need to be focused on what our stuff is, because nobody's going to do it better than us. Even when progressives will tell you they can figure out something to do for you better than you, don't believe the hype. Do not believe the hype. We got to work on it for ourselves. Somebody said white people go white is a word from the Lord.
Thank you for the question, Titus. We'll do one more question.
Thank you.
Before we do the rapid round and close out. So Daryl Ward, why don't you come on and ask your question?
Sure. So thanks again.
Daryl, come back. That's the second time you did that.
I don't think it's him.
It's not me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I was saying thank you so much for joining us for ALE. We really appreciate you being here, although virtually. My question, I wonder if you could speak more about the role elected office
I just muted
plays in
myself.
our movement. That is, is there a need for more of us to pursue elected and appointed roles of public service? And if so, what could that look like?
Well, I think that if someone feels inclined and called, they should do it. I was telling somebody the other day, when a young person is really good at speaking, if you grow up in the church, people are like, oh, he's a preacher. They gonna be a preacher. Like, they just decide it for you. And it's one and the same for me, because I know politics well. I've advised a lot of elected officials and advised a lot of campaigns. People are like, you should run. No, I should not. That is not my calling. My calling will be to help advise the candidates, but what y'all don't want is me in an elected office. And I don't want that for myself. But if you feel called, if you're like, I want to go and help solve problems in the nation's capital, or I want to run for the highest office in the land, or I want to be on the school board, or I want to be the dog catcher, whatever it is, and you feel called to do that, I think you should. If you feel some type of a pull towards that, you should do it. I definitely think we need good people in elected office, people who are passionate about problem solving in that way, people who don't mind a check with a few less zeros on it. I think that is fantastic. You might be like, hey, this is an investment I'm making in my career now, and I'll catch them zeros with the book deal when it comes. I hear you. I respect it. And I'm happy to talk to anybody who is thinking about running for office. I still sit on several boards related to the CBC. One of them is the CBC Institute. There's a political boot camp every summer. Sometimes they do them multiple times during the year. Highly encourage it. Collective PAC, which is a Black PAC run by two of my great friends, Stephanie Brown James and her husband, Quentin James. They do something similar. Like, do all of that and see if you think it's for you. Go work in public policy on the Hill, in the state legislature, for a mayor, if you're more attracted to what executives do, a governor, or in the White House, to see if you really are interested in it. But I think it's great if you want to run for office, and we can never have enough. We're totally underrepresented at the state level in terms of state legislatures. Black folks are underrepresented. We are finally at demographic representation in the House of Representatives in Congress, but of course not in the Senate. There's not a single Black woman now that Kamala is gone. Of course, the governor in California appointed a Latino man. So we definitely could use some more. So I support it.
Lovely. Okay, wrap around, Angela. I love when you do this with your guests. And so just to get some more on Angela Rye, just gonna do some quick questions, rapid, first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
So favorite song on repeat right now?
It's not a favorite song. It's a favorite album. My cousin hit me to this guy named Londrell, and he has an album called Self-Care Package. And it literally goes, they're meditations with music, with the music track on them. And it goes by the chakras. I love, so good. We listen to it every morning.
Okay, I'll have to add that to the list. Mm-hmm. The person to have lunch with from the past.
Oh, so I have a genealogist who's a distant cousin in my family, and he told me that the first ancestor he could find was an enslaved woman named Marie from Senegal, and I would love to sit down with Marie from Senegal.
Nice. Current book.
Current book. Well, I'll tell you one that that's right. Yeah, since we've talked about her so much today. Y'all got to read this. I finished it already, but it's so good. The Purpose of Power, How We Come Together When We Fall Apart. Alicia Garza, very timely right now. She wrote this even before the Capitol Hill terrorist attack, but it's very timely right now, and I highly encourage it.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Current favorite TV show? I know you probably don't have a lot of time to be glued to the screen, but
God. No, but you know what I watched, and this is so the least Black thing I'll say all day. But if I can remember the sister who played the role in the show though, because she was dope. Anyway, The Queen's Gambit on Netflix. I binge watched it in 2 days. It was so good. Brian, it's not grownish. Brian said grownish because I was on grownish last night. But no, it wasn't grownish. But I do love Yara and Kenya and everybody. They're great.
Favorite business school? It's only one right answer.
And that's such a setup. I guess. So then you're going to have me try to compromise my values. You want me to say this because of my check? University of Michigan, all right. Y'all all right. Y'all all right.
We're going to have to mute your mic for a second.
What I'll tell you is I believe that the people who have taken the time to be here tonight are really striving to do the right thing by the questions asked, by what was said in the comments. And I'm so encouraged that people like you are going to be stepping into roles or currently in roles that make business make sense, and help them to be more conscious in their treatment of all marginalized people. But as we're in Black History Month, Black people as well, to help them understand that Black lives matter when police pull us over, and they matter when you're hiring your vendors and your executives and people in senior management, that they matter how you treat your employees. And so I'm grateful that you all will be there to hold them to account, and I'm sure to hold me to account too. And I'm grateful that we're going to be so honest, Brian, on your birthday, and you're going to stop lying on God's children.
Brian has certainly made him so.
Toby said you've been here twice, so she like, you really need to be saying University of Michigan your favorite. I say y'all all right, all right, all right.
We'll allow it.
Y'all have been great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Angela. It's truly been a pleasure. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody that we've learned a lot tonight, and we've been truly blessed and graced by your presence. So once again, thank you.
You were a wonderful moderator. You need to do this full time.
Thank you. Oh, I might.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So
you got some kudos. You see everybody telling you that's good stuff. Maybe that might be a word.
That's sweet. Well, Angela, we'll probably talk offline about that. Maybe we'll see.
You got it. You got it, Kalane. Anytime. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Angela.
Much love. Bye-bye.